My name is Vern McKenzie. There was an ad in the paper in Williston, North Dakota in 1967, and it was put in by Nabors Journaling, and they were looking for roughnecks and truck drivers. And I answered the call, and I said I was never coming back to Alaska. I was here in the Army in 1956. And I didn't think I ever wanted to come back, but what Nabors had to say was about triple the money that I was getting in North Dakota. And it was pretty slow there. And so at that time, you worked 10 weeks on and 2 weeks off. And me and my bride, Audrey, which is still my bride, by the way, and we decided one trip. We had 3 little kids. We decided one trip would pay all our bills. So you know who put Vern on the airplane. And that was my first trip to Alaska, or to Prudhoe Bay, for Nabors Drilling. I have since then, pretty much all the years that I've had here, I worked for Nabors. Nabors started a trucking company because when I first got there, there was no equipment. Nabors had enough to move their rig from one location to another, but just enough. And that's why they wanted roughnecks and truck drivers. And I did both. So I fit right into what they needed. And so I got my first hitch in, which, by the way, when we went over the discovery well, they had not announced it yet. But we flew over it when we went to Rig 9, my first trip. And then they announced the discovery. Then ARCO picked up Rig 9 to drill the offset to the discovery well, which was about 8 miles away from the ARCO, or from the ARCO well. And ARCO picked up the rig, and it was about 8 miles away from the discovery. Well, that started my journey with Nabors and Peak, and then Peak or Nabors bought the authority, the Kodiak Oilfield Haulers, a trucking company, and I went to work for Kodiak then. And we bought a lot of equipment, and a lot of rigs come in besides the Nabors rigs. And then during the pipeline, we kind of stayed to ourselves, and we took care of our rig customers, moving them from one location to the other. And Nabors bought vacuum trucks, water trucks, fuel trucks, because within probably a year, there was probably 8 or 10 rigs running. And we were the largest trucking company there at the time. And we had some competition. They started coming in, and some of the rigs were bringing some of their own stuff. But the bigger companies like Crowley and stuff, they went Muckluck, they went to the pipeline because that was good money, and Alyeska was paying all the bills, and so they didn't have to go beg for work. But that left it open for us to, well, we just couldn't buy equipment fast enough. So we bought Kodiak Oilfield haulers in 1972. And at that time, we went union. We had to go union to get the permit. And of course, Jesse was pretty heavy duty at that time. He kind of controlled what was going on.
Jesse Carr?
Jesse Carr with the Teamsters, 959. And I even had to go union because I was the dispatcher. And then I moved my family up here in 1972. We moved into Anchorage, into Ocean View. And the day that we got here, the day after, I went to Prudhoe. And I worked 3-1 for probably 3.5 years.
How old were you then?
35. But I had a lot of rig experience. I had about 8 or 9 years of rig experience. And very little trucking experience, but nobody had much trucking experience up here in Alaska at that time. So my wife took care of the kids and took care of I didn't even get the truck unloaded. And I had to get on the airplane and go north. But that started, that was 1972, so that's been a few years now. In 1976, I come to town as the manager for Kodiak Oilfield haulers. Then I worked my way up to vice president and senior vice president, and we, by this time, the pipeline was going pretty good. The haul road was done and all that stuff. And we were very busy moving rigs, and like I say, we bought a lot of equipment. And we worked for Parker and Rowan and Alaska United, and but we kind of stayed in the water hauling, fuel hauling, rig moving. We got in the big crane business. Then we got in barge business around Muckluck Island time, and we hauled gravel to Muckluck Island by barge and tug. Of course, we all know what happened. Well, we were in rig moving business, and of course, having no regulations at Prudhoe Bay for weights and measures and that stuff, the drilling contractor could build the rigs as heavy and as long and as high as they would like, and then they come to us and said, get something big enough to move it. And we did, and we just kept getting bigger and bigger all the time, and the rigs kept getting bigger and bigger all the time. At the heyday, probably 500. I was responsible for Prudhoe, Kenai, Valdez, and towards the end, Texas and North Dakota. So I had a lot of people, but I had a lot of help. I had good help. And McLuck Island come up, and we more or less just hired a barge company, and they brought their people, and all we did is load them and unload them. And we hauled a lot of gravel there. Of course, we moved the rig out there and moved it off there. And then we went on to get new equipment, and we got in the heavy haul crane business. So as the bigger rigs come, and we had to buy bigger cranes. So we ended up with a 4,600 to 350 ton crane, biggest one that part of Alaska had ever seen. And we had a 4,100 and a 4,600, and that kind of started the crane business up there as more rigs moved in. For me, I guess letting my wife talk me into moving to Alaska in the early days, but I was involved in a lot of things. All these drilling rigs had winterizing, which it didn't have down south as much as they did up here. And we didn't really have any way to get the winterizing on early in the stages. So me and a couple of our hands designed and built a little P&H crane that we could drive in a Herc. Take the wheels off, put steel wheels on it, and we just drove it in. We got to the other location, drove it out, put the wheels on, put the winterizing up, and got out of there. And that really helped us because we had competition in the rig moving business by then. So you had to do a better job than the other guy and have the right equipment. Some of the things that Nabors 18E was the first wheel-mounted rig. And of course, being owned by Nabors, or partly, I guess they were owned by Nabors then, we moved it all the time. And that was a big, I remember the first time we moved it, it was cold, 45, 50 below. So we had about 3 cats on the front of it pulling it. And we had a very small incline going down the hill. And that thing got away from us and run up on the cats, bumped into the cats, and we got it stopped just as it was going over off the road. And there was a lot of trial and error, for things that we did, because all with the big heavy rigs and the big heavy equipment and stuff, it was new to everybody. The ice roads, when we started doing them, it was just, at the beginning, it was just snow. And there were more snow roads than there were ice roads. Well, the snow roads was just probably just snow, and we kept working it and hardening it up. Then we started pouring water on it and freezing it up, kept grading it and made it smoother, which you saved the time on the rig move. You know, the better the road was, the faster you could move it. Then we started using ice chips. Was a lot more. It was pretty expensive, but it was a lot faster. We would break up the ice on the lakes and rivers, and then we would load it like gravel. We'd take it out and spread it on the road, and then we'd come in behind it with water. And you had we used to call them 90-mile-an-hour ice road, you know. You could make them smooth as glass. And that, well, they're still using that way of building. To this day, they use ice chips and water. But of course, with everybody getting involved, and you have to have permits for your water. You could only take so much water out of each lake and stuff like that. And we, of course, it's been about 10 years since I've been there now, or had any real operational control. So a lot of things have changed from when we used to do it, but I think the longest road I probably was ever involved in was 100 miles. And
where was that at?
I'd be lying, I can't remember. Of course, the Caperic was at the beginning, that was all ice road out there to start with, and then when they found oil and stuff, then that's when they put the gravel down. And we didn't do much gravel work. Tennessee, Miller, Frontier, and John Ellsworth, they did most of gravel. And in the building, there were several. Green Construction was there. And, there were several other gravel contractors there that we didn't mess with. We stayed out of the gravel business and stayed in the rig moving and rig support business. Well, what we did was kept everything running. And like when we were building ice roads or whatever we were doing, we found it was better to keep doing it. Of course, you had tire problems and you had some different types of problems. But we found that by keeping it running, the hydraulics and the engines and everything, we were a lot better off keeping it going, slow down, take your time, but we're better off to keep running than we were to shut it off. Because if you shut it off, or if you lost one, it died, or for some reason the breather got plugged up or something, then you were 3-4 days, because you didn't have any shops or anything, so you had to get heaters and everything and get it all warm, get it started. And then it took 3-4 days to get it back running again, where if you kept using it and made a little progress on the road or location or whatever you were doing, you were better off to keep moving. So that's how we handled the real cold weather. I think that we had limits on our cranes. I don't think we probably 30 below. We were pretty careful about what we picked and what we did on that. But we also did the same as far as keeping our engines running and all that stuff. We would put people on them, babysit them all night long, just to make sure they kept running and stuff. But then as soon as it warmed up a little bit, we could go right back to work. You know, we didn't have to worry about getting them restarted or warmed up. Or this type of operation at 50 below and the wind blowing and stuff, you have accidents. And we had some terrible accidents, like if you drop in a draw works one time, well, to get another draw works up there, you know, to find one and get it out of Canada or get it out of where you were a couple months, you know. So anything like that was a disaster for everybody, for the trucker, for the drilling rig, for the oil company, for everybody. So it was very important to be careful and, you know, pay attention. As you know, you were there. And they, lot of good people. We probably on a heyday at Prudhoe when Pit 4 was going, and we had 5 rigs running for Husky in Pit 4, and we had the equipment on all them rigs, and we had the people. So to keep up with each individual operation, you had a lot of parts, you had a lot of stuff to keep running. I was very busy running around and making sure we had enough equipment, had the parts, and you know, nobody really in the early days had that kind of boom going on. The suppliers didn't. Like one time I went to Casper, Wyoming, and bought 8 trucks from, he probably never sold over 3 trucks and smaller stuff. And we bought 8, probably at the time the biggest that Peterbilt manufactured. And now they all went to Pit 4. Of course, we had to rig them up. Herc, built a Herc strip. Alaska General had the contract to do the ice road, the locations and stuff for the government or for Husky. And so they would build a Herc strip on each one of the locations, and everything was Herced. And the smaller rigs, them rigs was probably about 110 or 12 Herc loads. So it was all, you learned a lot of lessons getting them on and getting them off, and this freezing up and stuff. So it took a lot of work and a lot of people, and of Of course, money was not a big object at that time. If Mr. Carr got a little bit out of line and wanted more money, we just gave it to him and went back to the oil companies and said, hey, we need a raise. And it was easy, but we all know now why it was easy with all the oil that we had. Well, within the company, Jim Taylor run Nabors Drilling from the beginning. Me and Jim drove truck together at Prudhoe when we moved the rig over from Beachy Point to the Arco first location that we drilled. And of course, he was a manager in Alaska for Nabors. And then Arco people was Benny Laudermilk and Joe Mann, Buck Osborne. Boy, there was just a bunch of them, and you probably remember some of these names. Some of our people was Lynn Stein, and boy, they just worked around the clock to make some of these things, happen. And it seems like in the later years, we trying to go too fast doing things, and we had more accidents, field wide. Back in the early days, we didn't have as many accidents or people getting hurt. They might have got hurt, but if you were sent home because you smashed a finger, you might not get back up there. Of course, a lot of us, I went back to North Dakota and got a lot of people because the weather was kind of the same. So I got a lot of people out of North Dakota, Montana, and Wyoming, and brought up as truck drivers and stuff because Alaska didn't have any. They didn't have no oil field here, so they didn't have the people, and they had a lot of cat skinners, a lot of greater people and stuff like that, but not the real truck drivers. So we got a lot of ours from down south. And like I say, it went from very small to very, very large. When I first went up there, I was a roughneck. I went up, we were drilling a well, or Nabors were drilling a well for Phillips 66, I believe. And that was probably 4,500 foot. And I got in on the tail end of that well in 1967. And then we moved the rig over and stacked it. And Nabors never had no contracts for anything after that. Well, then when the discovery happened, that's when Arco picked it up right away for the next year, the rig. And that was Nabors Rig 9. When you got the hole done, you had to have truck drivers to move it. So when they advertised in the paper, they wanted roughnecks and truck drivers. They wanted people that could do both. And I fit right into it because I had quit Roughneck and then went back to Williston and become a truck driver. So I was driving truck at the time. But like I say, I was a lot better roughneck than I was a truck driver when it all started. But we hired some good people, and we had some good people. Well, I think now, and I really like what a lot of these people are doing. They're starting some schools, and they got truck driving schools, and they got roughnecking schools, and they got safety, all kinds of safety schools and stuff. And I think if you can get involved in everything you can and get a jump on what you're going to face once you get to Prudhoe. But it's a lot different up there. Their safety people and everything is a lot different than in their train, or at least people paying attention to them. But I'd say go to school, even college don't hurt you when you get done driving truck. It's pretty nice to sit behind the desk, you know. But yeah, I think that it's still, if you got a good wife, Prudhoe Bay is still a good place to go. But there was a lot of divorces happen at Prudhoe. I was one of the very lucky ones. We've been married 65 years, and 4 boys, and we're still together, and they're all still alive. So she did something right. You know, I've been pretty successful for being non-educated and starting out driving truck or roughnecking to be, I was senior vice president of Peak. I was senior vice president of Nabors, Anglo Energy. I didn't have very many disappointments. Every time we had an accident, it was a disappointment to me. But me personally, you know, we took care of them when they come up, and we tried to treat everybody right. We treated our hands probably better than anybody. We started a lot of things at Prudhoe on taking care of the people, as far as 401k, and not without some help, you know, with Brinkerhoff and a lot of them when the union got involved. But we did a lot of things, and to make people happy, you got to make your wife happy. So you always tried to send her a little gift at Christmas, or give her, or send him home for Christmas or something. You always had, every time you got a chance, you always had to mention, or I did anyway, me and Taylor both would mention the ladies every time we had a chance. We always had at least one good big party a year to get all the wives out that we possibly could. And they are, you know, pretty much the backbone. Get on the airplane, you know, and it's kind of funny, but there was a lot of that because it wasn't real easy at the beginning. And you didn't really know. These rotations was just kind of set up. You didn't really know how long you were going to be there in the early days. You kind of finished the job up in a lot of cases before you got time off. You know, it was a big deal every time that we could, as far as my group, that we could convince our owners that we needed another big crane, you know, $200,000, $300,000, and we could convince them. Man, we patted ourselves on the back and we got it up there and we got it to work, and it was a big deal to us because it was our livelihood, and most of us, or a lot of us from North Dakota and Montana, and there wasn't a lot of money in the families. You know, you had to do the work in the early days. So to get the opportunity to come to Prudhoe, and like I say, if you could get we went from a 10-2 to an 8-2 to a 6-2. But if you got up there in the early days on an 8-2, boy, you could pay a lot of bills and you could buy some pretty nice cars and some nice TV sets for Grandpa and Grandma and whatever. So it was good to many, many people. Excellent it was. And I think we took maybe full advantage of it as far as our family, the McKenzie group. And I had 4 boys, and all 4 of the boys worked at Prudhoe at one time or another. You know, I'd just like to thank all the people that worked for me and worked with me and gave me the opportunity, and the people that I worked with. It's been a hell of a run.